It is a fantastic afternoon for football. Welcome to Training Camp Live, presented by Safeway. It is day 4 of Seahawks Training Camp, and we are here to get you ready for the Seahawks' first preseason game, which is now less than 2 weeks away, and, of course, the regular season. Joining me today to have this conversation that will focus on offense and running backs in particular is a former Seahawks running back in Robert Turbin and former Seahawks wide receiver Michael Bumpus. Hello, gentlemen.
What's up?
This is going to be a fun conversation. Turbo's been studying his notes. Bump has been going back and forth over things. There are a lot of things to talk about in the running game and the offense and the way that this is all going to fit in under Shane Waldron. But first, let's recap a couple of storylines from what we saw Saturday, which was the last time the Seahawks were on the field. And we were talking about the offense. We were talking about DK Metcalf making some incredible catches, but he was thwarted on at least one of those by newcomer Akella Witherspoon, who spoke with the media earlier today and said that he is addicted to the grind. He loves the competition. He loves the grind. And it's not just on the football field. Guys, I shared this with you earlier. He completed his biology degree during the pandemic, and he is set to go to med school when his football career ends. So if that's not proof that he appreciates the grind, I don't know what is.
That's proof for sure he appreciates the grind. I'm done with school. You won't catch me going back to school anytime soon.
We might catch you dropping an album, though. That is an entirely different story. Here's what else we saw on Saturday. Ethan Posick practiced with the team. That is good news for the center. We also heard Pete Carroll say that he really wants to see true competition, and that last year on the offensive line, he messed that up when he was talking about Cedric Ogbuehi and Brandon Shell. Cedric wanting to compete on the right side. Pete Carroll had profiled him as a left tackle and said Cedric came to him and was like, Coach, just let me compete for this against Brandon. Same thing is going to happen at center. Ethan Posick and Kyle Fuller, they are supposed to be splitting those reps 50-50. We are also seeing the competition play out at cornerback, where Pete really wants one guy to start one day and play with the ones and then play with the twos the next day. Turbo, how common is it that competition is the theme of any camp around the league, and what does it mean for Pete?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the key to everything as far as putting together your roster. You're going to get the best out of each player, and when the pressure's on, you're really going to be able to show, who you are as a competitor. When the pressure's going up against you, right, you're going up against other guys, and other guys making plays. Maybe another guy has a great day at camp. It puts a little bit of pressure on you. You got to come back the next play, you got to come back the next day, right, and really show out. So that aspect of competition is really important because it brings the best out of you, or it brings the worst.
Well, Bump, we're talking about practice, and I know that there are fans that are going to say it is just practice. Why is it not just practice?
It ain't just practice. Guys are fighting for their lives out here. There's some veterans who are established who can wake up every morning and say, you know what, I'm going to go out, I'm going to get my reps, I'll be good to go. And then there are guys like me back in the day who are waking up and like, I need to be perfect with my 10 reps today. If I'm not perfect with my 10 reps, they're either going to bring somebody else in or that guy under me is going to get more reps the next day.
Turbo, how critical are these practices talked about, right? Criticized and evaluated. That's really the word I'm looking for, right?
Yeah.
How hard is that?
Man, I mean, you're being evaluated every day. And sometimes you can get in your own head a little bit. You make a mistake, you might drop a pass, something negative happens on the field. You get in your own mind like, man, what are the coaches thinking now? Or how am I going to be on the depth chart tomorrow? It's important for guys to stay in the moment. That competition aspect, like we mentioned earlier, it's important. It brings the best out of you, or it can bring the worst.
As we watch the Seahawks get warmed up for today's practice, here's what's going to happen. We will show you as much as we can of the Seahawks working out right up until they start to get to actual running plays and some of those team sessions. We don't want to give anything away prior to certainly the first preseason game against Las Vegas or the Week 1 matchup against the Colts. We are going to be looking for a couple of guys to see if they are out there. I specifically am looking for Marquise Blair. He missed practice on Saturday. Coach said he got kicked in the heel. Nothing nothing to worry about. But, of course, you don't want to see him miss any more practice time as he comes back from that ACL. And we will be paying special attention to the running backs. That is our theme today. And I think as we watch those big offensive linemen warm up, I think, Turbo, I mean, we can take this in lots of different directions, but I wonder if the conversation actually starts with the offensive line or if we just jump into Chris Carson.
Everything starts with the offensive line. Nothing happens without the offensive line on offense, especially you got to snap the ball, obviously, with the center. So no yards come without blocking, pass yards, rush yards, right? So it definitely starts with the offensive line.
How has the running back group established the identity that people associate with the Seahawks?
Well, I think that is where you kind of start with Chris Carson. I mean, he's the tone setter of that running back group. From what I know, he doesn't talk a lot. He's not a rah-rah guy. He kind of comes in, gets his work done, works hard, right? But he sets the tone in that room. He's a physical runner, downhill, and the guys, they're going to be themselves, but they're going to feed off of that, and that's really important.
Bump, I did a little happy dance when the Seahawks re-signed Carson because I didn't know if it was going to happen. I can't imagine this group without him.
If, like Turbo just said, like he's the identity. If you don't have Chris Carson here, then who you're leaning on? You're leaning on Rashad Penny to lead the way, a guy who just hasn't been healthy. Can he get it done? I think he has the capabilities, but it starts with the big boys up front, and then it ends with 32 running that rock, getting downhill.
All right, let's take a closer look at the running backs as you see the big offensive linemen get warmed up here. Chris Carson has rushed for 3,000 yards, over 3,000 yards, scored 27 touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. He did miss 4 games. You were looking at him right now. That's Rashad Penny who's walking behind him. He missed 4 games last season, which affected his numbers, obviously, but he still finished with 681 yards, 5 touchdowns. He was also pretty nice with the hands, 4 receiving touchdowns. You talk about the yards that he has put up. First of all, style of runner. Turbo, you have ran in this system before. Who does he best compare to?
Well, that's a great question. Who does he best compare to in the league right now or historically? I think in the league right now, I would compare him to the guy in Tennessee.
Derrick Henry?
Derrick Henry. Yeah, I think they have similar running styles because if you watch, the Titans, they do a lot more man blocking, right, where this scheme is going to be, mostly zone.
Yeah.
But they're similar in the sense where they're both really physical, number one. But secondly, most importantly, they're one-cut downhill type runners. You don't see Derrick Henry doing a lot of wiggling in the hole, stuff like that, right? Uses his stiff arm, uses his strength to be able to get through tackles, break tackles, and get yards. Chris Carson is similar in that way where he's a one-cut downhill runner, uses his physicality to break tackles, uses that stiff arm to get away from defenders, not a wiggle guy, right? And he's able to pick up a lot of yards that way. He's been consistent also in that room, right? Whereas Derrick Henry's been consistent every year, over 1,000 yards, multiple touchdowns, right? You just talked about over the last 3 seasons, 3,000 yards for Chris Carson. That's on average 1,000 yards a season. That's consistency. They're really similar in that realm to me.
You mentioned something that I think is a really important difference to point out. We are still trying to figure out what exactly this Shane Waldron offense looks like. But if we take a look at how the Rams ran their offense the last few years, it is a straight zone blocking scheme up front with the offensive linemen. The last couple of years here, Bump, it has been a mix of zone and it's been a mix of man. And I know that part of it was to create some different opportunities downfield for DK and for Russ to throw deep. But how did that change in what you've seen, the identity of how that run pass game kind of came together?
The thing I like about zone is that it really allows the running back to affect the flow of the defense, right? Instead of kind of setting up blocks like we talked about off air with Turbo, like it really allows the running back to say, okay, I'm going to bring these linebackers to the right, so I'm going to stick my foot in the ground after I hit the B gap and boom, look for that cutback. Now, how's that going to help the pass game? If you bring what Shane Waldron did with the Rams here, which is a lot of shifting, a lot of jet, a lot of like I said, shifting, bringing the tight end to one side to the other side, you're making the defense adjust. So now you got them going east-west. Then you combine that zone look with it where the running back is pressing the B gap to the right and cutting left. You're just asking guys to get mixed up. And once you start doing that, you get the run game established. Guess what happens? You go up top to number 14 and big plays happen.
How will this be different than the previous incarnations of the zone blocking scheme? Because that is what Tom Cable ran when you were here, Turbo. But the way that we're talking about the offense is different than the way they talked about it in those years.
Yeah, I mean, Tom was huge on cutting on the backside in his zone scheme. I don't know if Shane's going to be the same way, but I want to mention something that you said about the play action pass and how it'll be effective. See, with the zone blocking scheme, the offensive line is running. Everybody's on the move. And with the man blocking scheme, you know, things are a little bit more stagnant, right? You're pointing out your guy, you're going after that guy, right? You're trying to get your head on one side to be able to create a lane for your runner. In the zone blocking scheme, off the play action, it looks so much more similar because you still have that same movement when you're faking the run, right?
Yep.
In a play action scheme and with the man blocking scheme, right, it looks more stagnant. It's almost like you can recognize pass a little bit sooner than you can against a man blocking scheme rather than a zone.
So this all fits into what the defense is going to see because it's going to be awfully hard to differentiate what's coming next, which I think has been easier for defenses to key on the last couple of years.
Right, exactly.
It also seems like what I'm hearing you say is when these guys and these big bodies up front start moving, it's a whole lot easier just to make that play, right? If you're starting from zero, right, and just pushing forward in a man scheme, that's hard to get the leverage and momentum and create those lanes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the other thing that's important, and you can, have your opinion on this as well, but when you have a first-year offensive coordinator, you're bringing in a new offensive scheme, you want to recognize what your identity is going to be. And once you recognize what that identity is going to be, then you can take that and you can grow from it. And so, these guys want to be focused on the zone scheme, which I think is great. They don't really want to mix in any man schemes, which I think you could. But because it's your first year, obviously you want to be able to identify what you are and get really good at that first before you go into adding anything else. Now you know who you're recognizing on the defense as an offensive lineman, right? Who you guys are pointing out as the mic, right? So everybody's on point and on the same page. When you start mixing in different schemes, you can kind of get off cue a little bit. So it's important to establish that identity, and I think the run game is in for a big year this season.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about idea. What can my guys handle? What are they good at? I'm sure every coordinator, right? You go up to camp, you're like, okay, we have to play tomorrow. These are the 8 to 10 plays that we are going to live and die by. And I think that's what we see here. We're not going to see a lot. And then every week, that's the beautiful part about football, right? Every week you start adding a wrinkle there, a wrinkle here. So it's foundation football right now. What can my guys handle? But as the weeks start going on, we're going to see some progression. I think that's what Pete Carroll wanted to see out of the past coordinator that he didn't get.
So when we think about what we could possibly see from Shane Waldron, let's go back to the Rams, right? We know that they're going to run a zone scheme up front. We know that there's a lot of misdirection. We know that we saw Todd Gurley get open and find these lanes. I mean, he would run for 20 yards downfield. Is that what we can kind of look for? Or if we were to transport ourselves back the last couple of years in LA, what would you expect, like, average yards for running, just rushing yards during a game?
Well, the goal is always to get 4 yards a carry, no matter what. So,
Turbo is zero impressed by this conversation, FYI, because it is always 4 yards a carry.
It's always 4 yards a carry or more. Obviously, you want to expand that as much as you can. I think it's important to realize that, Todd Gurley, Chris Carson, different type of runners.
Yep.
They have different skill sets. They can do different things. Chris Carson does have great hands, but that's not really his game, whereas for Todd Gurley, that was a strength for him. Get out of the backfield, line up in the slot sometimes, run a route, catch the ball, get a field, right? So they were able to do a lot more misdirection things with him as opposed to maybe with Chris Carson. Now, that remains to be seen, and they do have other running backs, obviously, in that room that they can utilize in different ways. That's an important aspect as well, but it remains to be seen how they're going to incorporate some of that misdirection as it pertains to Chris Carson specifically.
Yeah, I think chemistry is big too, right, Turbo? Like, because as a running back, you have to know, okay, what's the timing? When is my guard going to get off this double team and work up to that linebacker, right? So they're kind of feeling how fast you're going to hit the gap. You're kind of feeling how fast they're going to work up to that second level too. So I think the more reps they get together, the more opportunities Chris Carson is going to have to kind of hit the lanes like Todd Gurley did. But you mentioned it. They're two different type of backs, but Chris Carson says he has the best hands on the team, so we'll see.
Well,
we'll see about that.
I will not challenge Chris Carson on anything. What I will throw out there is that the Seahawks are playing two guards at positions that they did not see them at last year. You've got the rookie Damian Lewis, no longer a rookie, who moves over from the right side to the left side, and you've got Gabe Jackson in on the right side. He did not play last year, and so there's a lot of chemistry that needs to happen at that position to make all of this work. But to Turbo's point, this is not just a one-man running back room. When we factor in Rashad Penny and knowing what he has looked like out here through the first 4 days of camp, how can he help balance things out? He looks light. He looks light on his feet. He looks good.
Yeah, he looks good. We say he lost about 10 pounds. Usually plays around 235, 240. He's around 223. The main thing with this kid is just staying healthy. I mean, there's a point. He had a 2-game stretch before he got hurt last year. We had over 200-some yards and a couple touchdowns, and we're getting excited. We're like, here we go. This is why they drafted this dude, number one, and he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. It's not his fault. Like I say all the time, RB is one of the hardest positions to play because you are hitting or being hit every single play dang near, and I think that's what we saw out of Penny. It's his job to lose. Can he be a good number two? I think that he can, but he just has to stay healthy.
Yeah, it's going to come down to consistency with Rashad being healthy and being available on the field.
How much of this is also vision, right? Because we were talking about this. As a rookie, I think Rashad was looking for these openings, and part of this is the offensive line scheme that they were running, right? He was not as decisive as maybe that scheme called for, and I think maybe that was vision and just getting used to the league. Now that he's a few years in, how much of a difference, Turbo, does that make in knowing the league a little bit and having a different vision?
Oh, it's huge. You know, I remember when I was a rookie coming in first couple years running a zone scheme like that, because in college I ran inside zone but not necessarily outside, and so you have to trust yourself, and that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. Believe what you see. That's what my coach used to, Coach Sherman Smith used to play here, right?
Yep.
He was my coach. He used to always tell Marshawn and I, and really all the running backs in that room, say, believe what you see and be decisive in your decision, and if it's wrong, you know, we can come back. That's why we watch film, and we can correct it later. But if you're right, man, you're in for a potential big run. And so for Rashad, I think that's what it comes down to. Just going out there, believing what you see, trusting your eyes, all right, and going after and getting it.
I would say in talking to Rashad, the few times I was able to chat with him last year, his overall confidence level seems so much higher, not just on the football field, but just, you know, he's more of an introverted, quiet person. I think he has also just started to find who he is as a person, which I can only imagine translates differently on the field.
Well, honestly, that's what adversity does for you. You know, it helps you identify who you really are. When your back is up against the wall, there's some doubts about you out there. You're in an unfamiliar situation or territory that you haven't been in before, as far as being, you know, having an injury like this of this magnitude. It grows you as a player, especially when you're young.
Man, if you don't know who you are as a football player, you have no chance. Like you can't be a shifty, slow slot receiver and want to move outside and go up top. You ain't gonna beat nobody. That's not who you are. So I think the guys who understand who they are last longer. And what also I like about Rashad Smith the offseason, he stayed here. He didn't go back home. You know, he locked in. He got focused. Whatever he did during this offseason, I think contributes to the guy that we're seeing behind the camera when he's talking and he's confident. And he should be confident. The kid can play. To me, it's just all about health.
Well, in trusting that your body has healed, Bump. I mean, I think that's the other part of it is it's one thing to do it out here. They have not put on pads yet. When you put on pads, you got to trust that injury is 100%.
Yeah.
That is a big thing. That is a big thing. And, you know, I've torn my ACL before. I've had a number of different injuries. And I always say this, you know, and this is not to discredit anybody, but I think, you know, for me, it takes 1 year to recover, and it takes another year to actually heal. And so when you recover, I mean, you can be recovered and still feel pretty good and healthy. But for some reason that second year you feel even that much better from your injury than you did the first year. So not saying Rashad's not going to come back and be explosive and fast and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure he's going to have all the confidence in the world. He's prepared himself for these moments. So, I think he'll do well. But there is that year and a half, 2 year kind of gap there where you're fully healed, your body.
Especially from an injury like that, right? That's everything. Putting your foot in the ground and being able to change direction and go that way. I broke a bone in my foot, and I made the Hawks take me to the hospital like twice just to show me the x-rays. Like, look, are you sure this thing is healed? Are you ready to go? And you're right. That first year, I'm like, okay, I feel good. I'm all right, but I just wasn't the same player. That second year comes around. You've done your rehab. You had a good offseason. You're working out. You're good to go. Mental toughness, man. It takes a lot of mental toughness to come back from injuries.
Definitely.
Well, and again, it's not just those two guys, although if you put those two guys together with their style and the way that they complement each other and the identity that Seattle has as a team who can run the ball, man, I think that could be a really good tandem. But it's not just going to be those two guys. There's going to be at least a third guy in that room. We saw DJ Dallas getting a lot of reps last year after Travis Homer got hurt. I think there's a couple other names that we're going to be watching in camp. But how do you see that? And Turbo, you were in the locker room with Travis Homer. Right now, he is not practicing. He is coming back from a calf injury. He has been running before the Seahawks have gone out to practice. He is so good in pass pro.
Yeah.
Man, I know that he wants us to talk about him as a running back, but there were games where they really could have used him in pass pro last year.
That is the running back. That is running back. That is playing the running back position is pass blocking. Yeah, when I was in college, I'll say this real quick. My coach, the first thing we did when we had individuals from the start of training camp, new staff came in, new running backs coach, Elijah Tuyaki is his name. I think he's the defensive coordinator at BYU now. But we started pass blocking. No pads. We started doing these hand drills, right? Because that's a part of being a running back. That's the most important, one of the most important aspects of being a running back. Can you protect your quarterback? It's not just about doing cones and footwork. That's all the fun stuff, right?
That's what makes the highlights, right? I mean, I want to see you guys move through that line.
You know what makes the highlights in the actual meeting room is some of those pass blocks, some of those pancakes, some of those blitzes where a guy you just stun a guy and he has nowhere to go. You may not see that on ESPN top 10, but you see it in the film room with the team, and that's just as much of a highlight, right? Yeah. So very important aspect of his game for an undersized guy. He does it, he has some great pass blocking, some of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken about this drive maybe 100 times since it happened against the Vikings. Man, he picked up – I don't even think that was his assignment. He was on the left side of the formation, saw a blitz from the other side, slid all the way across the formation, picked it up, allowed Russell to throw that ball to DK. Sometimes running backs are the unsung heroes like linemen, right? They're not going to see things like you just pointed out. So I'm glad we got a running back here to let people know, look, watch that on film too.
Yeah, no, it's important. And it's not just physical either, man. I mean, it's a lot of stuff going on in pass blocking. And an offensive lineman can pick up your guy, so on the fly you got to adjust and pick up his. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and Travis certainly has the intelligence to be able to pass block back there.
Hopefully, Travis and his injury will be healed by the time the Seahawks are playing games. If not, it seems like DJ Dallas might have kind of the leg up on the competition just because he was on the field a little bit more last year. Bump, did we see enough from DJ to know what type of a player he is or not yet?
I don't think so. He had like 109 yards or something like that, and you hear Pete Carroll talk about him. They really like him in the pass game. Yes, that's nice as a running back, but you want to be used in the run game. He wants to run the football. I don't think we saw enough. I think it was a weird season for these rookies, man. There's no crowd there. The offseason is different. They had to adjust a bit. I don't think we've seen the best of them at all. Not yet.
Well, then who is your kind of pick right now to be that third running back in the room?
Third running back. Today, if I'm picking right now, I'm just going with the veteran because he's been there, Alex Collins. I'm just going with Alex Collins. He was a 1,000-yard rusher with the Baltimore Ravens, backed it up with 400 yards, came in last year, was productive. I believe scored 2 touchdowns in 3 games. Right now I'm going with him just because he has the experience, right? And football experience is huge, man. You rarely see rookies go out and be special. That happens every year. You see Justin Jefferson and guys that do that. But most rookies, there's a learning curve. So if we have to play right now, I'll go with Alex Collins, but got 3 preseason games. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I thought Alex Collins is kind of the dark horse here. We don't talk about him a lot. maybe because of the road traveled to get here. But the guy, when asked, stepped up, and he stepped up in a big way. And you can't ignore that. You really can't.
Well, and he's familiar with the team and the coaching staff. Not everybody's the same from his first go around, but he does have familiarity with the team. And, he's seen so much football, it does make it easier to do all those
Right.
little things. But I think all of us are kind of looking at Josh Johnson, wondering what he's going to be like, because I don't want to say flashed. Again, these guys have not practiced in pads, but he's had some nice runs in practice.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had pads yet.
I know. You're looking at me like this is practice, but come on. His pedigree looks good, Bum.
You look at history, right? His junior year, he rushed for 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns. He was going to be a second-day guy. And those are the type of guys that the Hawks they get and they develop and they contribute. So I'm leaning on that. I'm not going to look at the 7-on-7. It's almost like 11-on-11 looks like 7-on-7 right now because no one has pads on and every run is going for 20, 25 yards. So you can't really look at that. I'm just going off of what he did as a junior and see if he could kind of tap into that again.
We were just looking at, and I want you to comment on that, Turbo, but we were just looking at some drills that Chris Carson was doing. It looked like it was pass blocking against the sleds and the dummies right there, and he had to go and block two different guys and then come off and seal off, I'm assuming, a lane on the other side. You would actually be able to talk to this much better than I had. How much of that? See, we're watching it right now. Okay, so what are we seeing here?
Yeah, basically, this is all about feet right here. This is about feet. You're blocking, you're working your hands against a stagnant thing there, but you're going from one place to another because that's how it is in the game. So you're just trying to use your imagination. A guy rushing the passer is not going to be in one spot. He's going to try to move left. He's going to try to move right. So there you see the running backs moving left, moving right, getting your feet moving as you're punching to be able to get that synchronized and get that technique down.
We saw a couple of guys running the ladders earlier. That's one of my favorite things to watch running backs do.
Yeah.
Is that one of the running backs' favorite drills, or is that just for show?
I mean, for anybody at the skill position, especially on offense, the ladder is just, that's like, if you can't do the ladder, then you got some
slow feet don't eat.
You know what I mean?
But there are just some guys whose feet are so fast. And when the D linemen have to do it, actually, that surprises me, I think, more than anything. Poona Ford's feet move so fast on those drills. Yeah, I love watching guys run the ladders. Every once in a while, I think I can do it. And then I decide, this is not the time to embarrass myself in front of everybody else. Practice. Yeah, I'm probably not going to do that on my own. Okay, so there's the running back group. Size-wise, is it about what you would expect, Turbo? Like just physicality, what they look like if they come off the bus first, right? Does that look like a running back group that you don't want to mess with?
That looks like a pretty solid group to me. You got a fullback in there and Nick Ballore. Yeah, that looks like a good-looking crew, in my opinion. Got a couple of dreadheads in there, for intimidation.
You got the swagger of Chris Carson there. He just walks with a little bit of a swagger.
Yeah, because he knows. He knows he works hard. He knows he's prepared for the moment.
You mentioned the fullback. It's interesting. That position has just about died around football. There's not that many offenses that utilize a fullback. He is tremendous on special teams, and that is really where he makes his money.
Yeah.
Turbo, how have you seen that transition? Because it used to be, and for those Seahawks fans who have been around a while, Max Strong was the best fullback in the league for years. Why is that position not utilized the same way anymore?
Well, offenses are spread out now, and it's a passing league now, where once upon a time it was a run-first league, and it's just not that anymore. And it's not that fullbacks don't have a position anymore. I mean, some teams still utilize it. When we talked about the Titans earlier, they still utilize a fullback here and there. But, yeah, I mean, it's a throwing league. People want to see the ball in the air, coaches even. They want more receivers on the field, and they want to put more points up on the board. So there it is.
Well, I don't know how much Nick Ballore is getting in on offense, I guess, is what you're saying. But as long as he's there on special teams, we like it.
I mean, the more you can do, right? I mean, Nick Ballore, his effectiveness not only on special teams, but his leadership on special teams is huge. And when you can have a guy kind of take the reins of like, I'm going to be the guy that people look to from a special team standpoint, that's real value for a football team. Not a lot of guys really want to take that role. Special teams, especially when you come in as a young player, it's like, I didn't really ever do this in college. But when you find a guy who takes on that leadership role and does it well and really brings on the other guys from a special team standpoint, that's value that's honestly kind of hard to find. And so you can find that a lot around the league from the fullback position.
There's a situation for every type of player. And for Nick Bellore, it's going to be like, all right, we're on the 2-yard line. Let's get our big boy package. We're going to go downhill. He had 1 carry last year for 5 yards. First down. Made his money. There you go.
And his highlight reels. That was, he needed that one. Hey, so as we consider how the running back groups and the run game fits into this offense, let's revisit the concept of what a balanced offense is. I feel like we talk about this all the time, but Pete Carroll is talking about this all the time because this is what he's being asked about. I went back and I looked at the Rams' offense for the last couple of years, rushing yards versus receiving yards, rushing touchdowns versus receiving touchdowns. It should come as very little surprise to anybody. It is about the most balanced you could come up with. Almost even numbers, rushing touchdowns versus receiving touchdowns, and the yardage breakdown, it was about 4,000 passing yards to 2,000 rushing yards in each of the last 2 seasons. How does this help define, Bump, we'll start with you, the balance that Pete Carroll keeps talking about?
Well, one, let me point out that the Rams didn't have the quarterback that's here in Seattle. So that matters when it comes to the balance of touchdowns, throwing touchdowns, and passing touchdowns. Yeah. But I also think that when Pete talks about balance, just like, look, if it's 32 and everyone knows we're going to run the rock, we still got to be able to run the rock. Even if they pack the box with 7, 8 guys and personnel-wise is all set up, we still want to be able to lean forward and run the football. And now when they're down by 14 points with 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, they got to be able to spread it out and throw it. So it's not necessarily a 50-50 thing, and it's hard to compare the Rams' stats to these guys. It's because of number 3.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, obviously it's different because Russell Wilson is a different caliber quarterback than what the Rams have. But when you talk about balance on the offense, it doesn't have to be necessarily 50-50. Right, I think it depends on what your personnel is, but it's being able to run the ball when you need to run the ball, and even if you're down, 14. I remember, we had games when I was playing, we were down 14 or 21 at halftime. We'd start the second half running the football with Marshawn, and that's how we got back in the game, and still be able to identifying that balance creates a pretty prudent offense.
What about time of possession? Because I bring this up a lot. This is not a popular thing to say or to talk about because everybody who wants to throw the ball down the field and wants to run as fast an offense as you possibly can. And I always think back to Peyton Manning and Denver the year that the Seahawks and Denver matched up in the Super Bowl. Their average drive time was about 3 minutes. It was ridiculously fast. And I always look at time of possession because if you're controlling the clock with a running game, I'm thinking this puts your defense in a much better position. Is time of possession still a thing worth looking at the end of the day, Turbo?
I think it is. Absolutely. If you're controlling the ball, then you're controlling the clock. If you're controlling the clock, then you're controlling the game. And if you're controlling the game, you're most likely to win and put your defense in a better position if we're speaking from an offensive standpoint. But I think time of possession is immensely important still in today's game.
Yeah, it is, right? Keep the other team off the field, especially if you play against a guy like, let's say, Pat Mahomes. You want to keep him off the field, so you have to be able to run the football. And then let me point out, too, like, throwing the ball doesn't mean you're going down the field 25, 30 yards. Quick game. It's just as good as a run. I'll take a 5-yard speed out right now. Right. The defense is going to give it to you. So that's balance as well. People are falling in love with the deep ball because Pat Mahomes has the perfect personnel. Andy Reid's a genius. He calls it perfectly. Out here, we're going to get those deep balls, just not at the rate that those guys get. Be okay with a slant. Be okay with a check down to a running back. That's true balance right there.
Right. Tom Brady's the king of dink and dunk, right? Controlling the ball, controlling the possessions. Outlook of the game has been pretty in his favor over the years.
It really sounds a lot like you were talking about what's happening in baseball now too, right? Everybody's in love with the long ball. Yeah. But if you can play small ball, that's when you start to really get some momentum and get the runs that you need. I know that we only have a couple of minutes left here as we're taking a look at the fans on the berm. I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because you mentioned, Bump, that it was really different for rookies last year, and it was just it was a screwy year. And Turbin, I don't know how many games you were able to go to and what that looked like, but with no fans in the stands, a lot of Sundays felt like practice, right? Now, it is hard to manufacture enough energy without fans in the stands. The upside to that for rookies is there's nobody there to boo when you make a mistake, and it's potentially easier to move on to the next play. Do you see this as a positive or something they're going to have to overcome this year because it is going to be very, very different?
I think everyone's different, right? I think when I played and we're at these practices with the fans there, I fed off of it. I love people there. Even if you're booing, I'm like, yeah, boo, let's go. Like, I want that energy. Some guys like it. I think some guys do without it. Some guys don't even realize that it's there. So I think it affects everybody differently. These rookies, though, that were rookies last year, second-year guys now, I think they're going to feel like rookies again, though, because they've never experienced what the 12s are like out there. So there's going to be an adjustment. But for those guys who come from big programs, you know, down south or, you know, stadiums with 50, 60,000 people, they're going to feel right at home.
Man, I don't know. I don't care what your personality is. When you step into the state, what's it called now?
Lumen Field.
Lumen Field. It's not C-Link anymore, right? And those 12s are roaring. Yeah, that energy is going to be there. You're going to want that energy no matter what. And the guys who were rookies last year going into this year, it's going to affect them, but I think it's going to affect them in a positive way. This is football again now. It's going to feel real again. So that adversity of the crowd that you get or the positivity from the crowd, that's all a part of the game, and I think it'll work into their benefit.
What about communication on the road for the offense?
That's probably going to be the biggest hurdle, you know, for a guy who was a rookie last year, who's going to be a rookie this year. That's always the biggest hurdle. You know, how are we going to communicate in a hostile environment? Whether it's signals, things like that, that's probably not something you're used to unless you come from like the SEC or something like that. Yep. So that'll be one of the hurdles that they'll have to get over. But I think throughout the season with experience, they'll be able to get through that.
But Bump, put that into context of the Shane Waldron offense where we already know that it relies heavily on communication, because if there's going to be a lot of plays run out of similar looks, it only takes this much to knock one of those plays completely off balance and to blow it.
Sign language. You got to communicate with your hands, with signals and all that stuff. If you can do that, you will be fine. As a receiver, I'm reading the quarterback's mouth and I'm looking for signals. I don't even need to know the snap count. I'm going to look at the ball anyway. Receivers jumping off sides drive me crazy because all you got to do is look at the ball, forget the snap count. So it's an adjustment. Everyone's going to have to adjust. Coach is going to have to adjust. We got to watch the game last year in a suite and actually hear these guys celebrate and hear the pads smacking, hear them talking trash from other sidelines. We're not going to get that anymore. The players aren't going to get that anymore. All that stuff is going to be muffled. So it's going to be adjustment all around, but these are professionals. Right? These guys are dogs. These are alphas out here. They will adjust. Some will rise to the top, and some will be affected by it.
My favorite player to listen to last year, Quandre Diggs. He talks a lot of trash, and it is fun to listen to. I'm going to have to listen a little harder. As we get close to wrapping this up, when you go out and you watch practice today, Turbo, what do you look for? I'm going to look at probably some eye candy. It's all going to be a little bit of eye candy to me, right? Like, I'm going to watch some things, but I'm not really going to be able to zero in like you can. Mm-hmm. What are you going to be looking at?
Yeah, I'm going to be looking for we talked about the running back position today, so I'm going to see some consistency. You know, the guys who've really shown out the first few days of practice. I think they've had 4 already, right? Yep. You know, can you come out and do it again now? You've had a day off, right, on Sunday, right? Can you come out today and be – sometimes you have like a lackadaisical day coming off a day off, right? Let's see who's going to step up, make some plays today, and show some consistency and some leadership out there.
Even without pads?
Even without pads.
You're going to see him make plays even without pads?
Yeah, even without pads. There's still some things you can see even without pads. I think you can see obviously more with pads, but
Okay.
even
I'm
without
I'm
pads.
just testing you a little bit.
Yeah.
Bump, what are you going to be looking at when you're watching practice?
You know, I'm looking at these receivers, man. I'm trying to see what's going to happen. What formations are there in? I assume they'll be a little tighter to the line of scrimmage at times, a little bunch formations. And then who's that number 3 receiver going to be? Dwayne Eskridge is out right now, so there's opportunity. And from what I've been hearing and seeing, Freddie Swain's been getting a lot of runs with the ones. And that's good for him. That creates what we talked about, just more competition. Who's going to make plays? And now those second string, third string guys, who's catching the rock? You drop the ball one time, man. I'm telling you, I've been there. You drop it one time, you're second guessing everything that's out there. So who's going to bounce back from mistakes, and then what type of formations are we seeing out there?
Yeah. And it's a little look at the DBs too.
You know what I was just going to say. I want to see how the
DBs
DBs are rotating in. Jamal Adams is not practicing yet, but I do want to see how they're pairing those guys up, because that's some interesting competition back there.
Yeah, we talked about that corner spot, and you talked about Witherspoon making some plays
He was
last week.
Good.
And so, can you come back? Can you do it again today? After a day off, especially.
He's talking about Demarius Randall too.
Yep.
Right. He's played safety. He's played corner. Man, that's a good competition at that corner spot.
Very underrated player. We talked about this last week on Thursday. Randall.
Yep. Yes.
He can make some plays now.
And he has made plays
some
against Russell Wilson.
He can make some plays.
He can indeed.
Interesting spot to keep an eye out.
I tell you what, we have been talking about, can you come back and be consistent and do this day after day? You will get a chance to see if we can do that tomorrow, because that is the next time you can join us for Training Camp Live presented by Safeway. We hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at the running back and how this all fits into the offensive system. You could not find better guys to break this down than Robert Turbin and Michael Bumpus. I'm Jen Mueller. Thanks for spending some time with us. We'll see you next time.